Benji, why don't you pray for us?
Well, Father, we Lord, want to take the opportunity to slow our minds, to quiet our souls, Lord, to lower the internal conflict, Lord, to be quiet and moldable, Lord, by you, to come with no expectation, but Lord, to see you, to hear you, and to be a part, Lord, of the work that you are doing. Lord, I pray even now, Lord, that you would inspire us, Lord, to be quieted, Lord, and to let go of each thing that we hold, Lord, to be, Lord, humble before you. I pray, Lord, that the things that we read would become living, Lord. They wouldn't be stagnant words on pages, but Lord, that we would learn to relate to them, Lord, and to seek, Lord, how to fit, Lord, these things into our lives, Lord, the things that we do daily. I pray that our hearts toward one another would be, Lord, informed by you, Lord, and led by you, Lord, in the way that we love one another, in the way that we share fellowship. Lord, help us to come, Lord, with open arms and hands, Lord, with the things that we like to call ours. Thank you for this time. I pray that you would bless it, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Something I wanted to ask before we started is for those of you who are here in this class, most of you have been around for at least a few years in or with the Analects time, so that going back even back to when Emmanuel was leading it. And I don't want to take that for granted, even in light of some of the topics I've started to bring up in my writing class. So what I'm asking is for each one of you to not just be aware of that, but consider yourself to have the additional experience you do have, even over some of the younger people in that class, and basically don't be too humble or shy about it, is what I'm trying to say. Like be willing to offer things that have been built and accumulated in your own heart and mind through these last few years in this time. And you should know by now, this is not talking about, or this is not having to do with who knows more or less of Chinese history and philosophy and the Analects and things like that. That's not even necessarily what I'm looking for when I'm asking you to be more willing to speak up and share thoughts about what you have learned. It's more so the very thing that we are trying to teach and instill in the the younger minds and hearts, which is a way of learning. It's a different kind of attitude of the heart. That's what a true student has. It's not just a keen and attentive mind. That is definitely necessary. But those sort of things can be developed in different contexts. That's not really the goal. The goal is to develop an attitude of the heart. So definitely something unique to what is learned in this kind of study. Because again, it doesn't have to do with mental prowess and intellectual achievement. And that's actually one of the first things we're going to be looking at together. So I know you guys have familiarity with that subject, and I want to take advantage of you and your experience and knowledge in it, even in the other class. So at the very least, expect to be called upon in certain instances, and don't be caught off guard in that. But you don't even have to be called upon either. You can share. I'd be very appreciative of any additional thoughts you had. Like, for instance, Isaac in his assignment, or his submission of his last assignment was really helpful to me because it recovered a lot of notes he had saved from previous times and brought up even just Analects that I hadn't even considered, that were considered at that time, so it's helpful for me. So that kind of stuff. And again, it doesn't have to be in the moment of class. If there's something that had been assigned that week and you recall some things that have been discussed maybe in a similar vein, then share that with me. That would be helpful. So that would, again, that's totally open and even expected of you by me. So I think we're in 1419, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Esther, you can read the first part and then I'll read the second part.
The master remarked that Duke Ling of Wei lacked a way. Ji Kangji said, "If that is so, why has he not lost his state?" The master replied, Kong Wenzel manages his diplomatic protocol. Priest Wu manages his ancestral temples. And Wang Sun manages military affairs. This being the case, how could he lose his state?
This is the exact same as another Analect. Is that what you're looking for?
This is. There's a. I'm trying to see if this is the same guy I'm thinking about. Okay, let me read. We have already encountered Duke Ling, the misguided ruler of Wei, addicted to women and military adventures, as well as the ministers mentioned here, Kong Winse in 515, Priest Duo in 616, and Wang Sunjia in 313. Though capable, none of these ministers were particularly virtuous, which serves to accentuate the importance of choosing ministers wisely. When the talents of ministers are well matched to their jobs, even ungentlemanly ministers can enable an incompetent ruler to remain in power. Zhu Shi comments, although these three men are not necessarily worthies, their talents can still be put to use, and Duke Ling was able to employ them in a manner appropriate to their abilities. Yin Tun adds, Duke Ling's lack of the way should have caused him to lose power, but his ability to employ these three men allowed him to still preserve his state. Considering this, how much more could be accomplished by a ruler possessing the way and employing the worthiest people in the world? This observation concerning an unworthy ruler's ability to hold on to power may also be intended as a subtle jibe at Ji Kongzi himself. So I don't know if I don't think this is the same person that I had in mind, but this is, I think, one of many instances in which Confucius had an opportunity actually to serve or be maybe a higher ranking minister or advisor to a ruler or a duke, but seeing their corruption, he would actually turn away from them because they were not just corrupt; they were very obstinate in their ways, and so there's a lot that Confucius would communicate without even having to say anything by simply leaving the state. And I don't know if this is what took place in this particular instance, but there was at least one other time where it was actually a duke that had received a gift of dancing women and was like super enthralled with it and was neglecting his ritual duties as a result. And Confucius was like, okay, I'm having nothing to do with this, and he leaves. But that's somewhat besides the point. That's just kind of context for the way he would respond to these sorts of rulers. But what this is really communicating is, I think the most important point is the last part of that commentary, saying, considering this, how much more could be accomplished by a ruler possessing the way and employing the worthiest people in the world. There's a lot of potential in those who do not just have ability or capability of doing their job well, but the gentleman sees not just the skill in which someone's able to perform their office, but the manner in which they're doing it. And so yes, there's a lot of potential in those individuals who are very, very capable and very skilled in what they do. In fact, enough to where if you have a corrupt or ungentlemanly ruler that still has such ministers, even though they themselves are not gentlemanly, he's able to sustain his state somehow, at least for a time, because skill and ability in whatever the office is, it has a positive consequence. But this is an interesting point where Confucius is making it known that one doesn't necessarily have to be a gentleman to do certain things well. And so this is kind of breaking down what for his disciples I'd say tends to be a pretty black and white way of seeing things. I don't even know if Ji Kongzi was one of his disciples, but he was still thinking this kind of this sort of a dualistic way when he says, if he lacked the way, then why does he still have the state? Because the way that you tend to teach things, you could assume him of implying this. You've pretty much always said, maybe even indirectly, that when a ruler lacks the way, he loses his state. That's just kind of like this formula. But again, Confucius, as he often does with his disciples, has to explain the nuance of the situation, because that nuance is always there. And it's never in contradiction to what he said before, but it actually further affirms it and enhances the disciples' understanding of it. So in this case, this is a way to learn how to judge, how to discern the hearts of other men, of other people, in a way that a ruler should, which is, it's not just a matter of their ability to do what they've been trained or brought up to do. Because looking at an example like the Duke Ling of Wei. He has good ministers, his state is thriving, and this is all in light of the fact that he's obviously a corrupt or corrupting ruler. So maybe the way doesn't matter. That's another conclusion you could draw from an example like this. So he seems to be doing fine, he doesn't have to weigh, and didn't you say that you need the way in order to survive the state? And interestingly, the master's not very defensive about it. He just says, well, he has pretty good ministers, and he doesn't see it as a way to explain whether or not the way is needed. He just says, at least the commentator here says, just imagine what this kind of state could be with these sorts of ministers if they did have the way. The way is not just about, this is what it further implies, okay? This is the next step in it. The way is not just about keeping a state alive. So if it's not just about keeping a state alive, it's not just about enabling a state to survive, then what does the way actually do in a state? In a people? Or in a people governed by those who walk in the way?
It allows it to grow. It doesn't just keep it in a stagnant.
So what does that look like then?
It's more to do with the rulers. It's actually the people that matter the most. It's kind of like it's said before in other Analects. It's about cultivating the people, and it's about the way of life in the state that allows it to be stagnant or to grow.
In order,
The what?
reach order.
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably less about like quantity of people and growth, but more like the quality of how people do business together in that state and how they engage with their ruler in order, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So,
Think even beyond the state in question. And this is always helpful to do when you're reading anything from a certain time period. Think of the social climate that they're in, like what's going on in China at that time.
All the different dukes ruling over the different
Yeah.
colonies.
So a state that's governed by rulers and ministers that know the way, what do you think that ends up doing? In the midst of a fractured and chaotic.
Unites.
Mm-hmm. But uniting, it's a kind of the state becomes like a light to other states before there's even any kind of like congregating or uniting of states. In fact, it's a very consistent theme. Let's look at back in book 2, the very first chapter in book 2. It says, the master said, one who rules through the power of virtue is analogous to the pole star. It simply remains in its place and receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars. We might as well read the short commentary. The point of this passage is that the spontaneous harmony brought about by heaven and the natural world, so the pole star, is to be a model for the human ruler, who in a Wu-wei fashion will bring the world to order silently, inevitably, and unself-consciously through the power of his perfected moral virtue. As Baoqian notes, one who possesses virtue is Wu-wei, and like the pole star does not move, yet receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars. So a ruler that rules a state, the state becomes that same kind of pole star to other states, you might say. I was going to say, this is a very consistent theme in something like Mencius, where he did something very similar to what Confucius did, however many 100 years or so after him, where he would travel from state to state and ruler to ruler to see if there's anyone who could or would be willing to put his teachings into practice. And interestingly, he was a lot more lenient towards their their shortcomings than Confucius had seemed to be, but not necessarily because he did things differently, but because it was a different time and place, different people.
I had a conversation with my dad that kind of reminds me of this. It was in regards to bringing up children, which I would say is not too different from being a ruler of a household versus ruler of a state.
Yeah.
And it was in regards to how to raise a child in the terrible twos period of their life, where very often there's a lot of fit throwing and just a nasty age for children in general. But I had shared a insight of mine that he also seemed to agree with, that it was, I wonder if the culture of the house, and by the house, the extension of the father in that state, the head of the house, is actually what creates such a reaction in a child. And that it's not actually about like how to properly discipline a child in that terrible twos time frame, but actually what the child lashing out in certain ways says about what's going on in your inner self, and how that may actually be a sign of self-reflection and self-work needed for that. And I think the reason I think this goes very much along with this, with that polar star analogy, is I think very often of the, I don't know which one it is, but we quote it all the time, the how do you change the world? Well, first you start within yourself. I think a lot of this polar star thing has to do with the ruling and order within your inner man. I think of this honestly primarily because of that document your dad had sent out for his reading for his class.
Yeah.
And how it resonated with me really wrong. And I think that part of the reason for that is because it felt very contrary to this way. The way of focusing on the self and that being an outward expression rather than this outward control that always is looking at the flaws within others and trying to correct that, which to me feels very religious. And so anyways, I don't know if it's super related, but I feel like there's semblances of a connection to different things going on right now with this.
Yeah, there was something I felt about the writing you sent out too that was troublesome to me, but I didn't let that completely define my take on it per se.
Sure.
I'm not saying you did that at all, but like I even before you mentioned it just now, I was thinking of that in light of what seems to be kind of a contrary way to approach authority, whether it has to do with being a ruler
Or a father.
or a father. Yeah, I would say the real bit of wisdom that is evident in that lady's writing is the way that the will of a young person is subdued before there's even any kind of resistance that becomes a pattern in them. And the subduing of the will is not something, and I wouldn't even say these parents ultimately thought of this in this way themselves, especially as believers. But those parents didn't become God to their children. They were a vessel God uses in every parent of authority and discipline for young children. But the will of the child doesn't ultimately belong to the parents, but it does come into a place of right order, in which I think from that point on, and this is the beauty you see in that kind of family discipline, but that puts discipline into practice that way from a very early point. Things very clearly operate in what is actually a Wu-wei, effortless action manner. Because the will of the children isn't unruly. It really does. It's, if you want to think of it in the example of the pole star and the myriad lesser stars, they're all in their right place because they've been put in that right place by a prudent and wise choice in early parenthood to bring it's doing it's obviously this can't be contested. It's doing the child a huge favor because of all the grief that is then avoided later on if there was just kind of this really shallow like idea of we're gonna just do things naturally and let the child, you know, figure things out on his own in a sense. That's still something they end up doing, but in that they've been set on a path in which to do so. The child isn't to, in a manner of speaking, I don't let this collide with other ways you've come to understand what a good parent looks like. But the child isn't meant to necessarily choose their own path at a certain stage of their lives. That is literally the role of the parent. When they don't have the eyes to see what is right yet, and they don't have the heart to discern what is right and real and good yet. That's something that is acculturated into them. It's culturally refined in them. And that's why that early stage of life is so vital to that process. And so once they have been put on the right track, if you will, then yes, they begin to discover and figure things out for themselves, and they're not micromanaged by parents, because the parents don't have to micromanage them. They have a steady heart. Doesn't mean that they don't ever encounter any difficulty. In fact, the complete opposite. The parents expect them and even look forward to them encountering difficulties, but they're able to do so now with an enlightened, disciplined heart.
I think the thing with that writing that stuck out to me was the mention of, I don't know the context, but like some sort of fire or something that happened in the household, and like the children had to like leave the house for a bit and go to like stay with other relatives or places, and how each of them like fell back into bad habits or bad temperaments, whatever you want to call it, and how there had to be like a re-education that took place. And that to me feels like it's due to the insincerity of what that kind of discipline produces. I can see the aspects of what you're saying, and I do agree. I think there were aspects of that writing that were partly admirable. But I think that, I don't know, I feel like when the child, I can see what you were saying with, I don't think that there is an ability for a child to recognize right from wrong, especially that early in life. But simultaneously, I feel like when the will of a child is not something that they willingly submit because they recognize that something is good, versus you just tell them that you are going to do this because it is good, that there is something produced there that becomes more of a familiar and I use the word religious too much, I'm trying to think of something else, but it just feels very inorganic. It feels insincere, and it feels like the child committing themselves to something that they don't even quite understand, which I feel like produces difficulties down the road. Whereas if you are showing them something, if you are creating an environment where they are able to see good and choose good, rather than being forced into good. And again, I'm not claiming that I know, I'm just airing out my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
That is where my mind went.
And so this is one of the many cases in which you learn to approach every writing with a discernment of what you're looking at. You know, it's not like you see one thing that seems inconsistent with what you have learned to be the right way to do things, just to put it generally, and then it kind of corrupts the whole thing for you. That's not really the way to read anything that has a wisdom to offer. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I'm not accusing you of this at all, but some of my favorite authors actually are not authors that I can read with like this complete abandon to the way that they think and the manner in which they have done things and consider certain things in a very specific or particular way. Because to do so would be that is to read without discernment. And so this writing in particular, that was my conclusion on it. Is, I mean, first, I'm not actually going to draw a conclusion here yet until I'm able to hear out what my dad himself gleaned from it.
Agreed.
And then also, even if I had just chanced upon this myself and saw what I did in it, it would be something that I think I could still very well glean quite a bit from, even if there are certain methods that were unique to a certain culture, again, at a certain time, that maybe are not as suitable for the way things are currently. But even that is not something I would completely dismiss as irrelevant.
Sure.
But you always kind of keep things open and don't be too quick to draw conclusions or submit a judgment on a thing.
Agreed.
So you kind of suspend yourself in that way. And I think that's a way in which you're able to receive a lot more than you otherwise could from something that might actually have a pretty profound wisdom.
I can normally do what you're saying very effectively, and I absolutely try. I would say that's one of the benefit of my upbringing in a very Western way, is I very much always try to expand my horizons to be able to glean knowledge from anything, even if it highly conflicts with what I know. And that's actually part of the reason I'm very appreciative of having the conversation in the first place, because for whatever reason, that writing was very difficult for me to look at in an objective manner like you're describing. It resonated with me on an emotional level that disturbed me, which doesn't happen much with writing. And I actually recognized that I was, while reading it, unable to interact with it in a proper context because it was making me so emotional. And so that part of the reason I'm appreciative of the conversation is because I can recognize that I was not able to view it in a favorable lighting. And so I want to be able to understand the benefits by talking with others about it. Because the way that I'm coming from it, I can objectively recognize is not seeing the full picture. But at the same time, I don't know, I felt very emotionally disturbed by it. And that's something uncommon with writing for me.
There was one other Analect I wanted to bring up. That is a very well-known one and very relevant to what we were just discussing with the 1419. This is 1219.
Oh, I just looked at that. That's funny.
Yep. It says, this is actually the same guy, I think, Ji Kongzi, asking another question. He says, asking about governing, he asked Confucius, if I were to execute those who lack the way in order to advance those who possess the way, how would that be? Confucius responded, in your governing, sir, what need is there for executions? If you desire goodness, then the common people will be good. The virtue of a gentleman is like the wind, and the virtue of a petty person is like the grass. When the wind moves over the grass is sure to bend. So you could read the commentary if you want to, but you have that same image of the Chinese word for virtue, we'll look at again at another point in time, but it's kind of funny in English. It's duh, so D-E, kind of pronounced as if it's D-U-H, duh. So this has also been described to be a kind of like, and this could be a misleading definition of it, but it's like a charismatic power, but not one that in its essence, in its true nature, can be used by a man to, or in a perverse way, because that completely goes against what that actually is. It's virtue. It's the working power of goodness in a person.
Very tied into effortless action as well. So by
Yes.
effortly
Yeah,
applying it.
In fact, yeah, that's the only way in which it can be properly manifested is when it's not something that one intentionally tries to produce or manifest in themselves. It occurs in a very spontaneous way. So any pursuit actually to use in a insincere, manipulative way actually doesn't permit virtue to exist in a person at all. So kind of cuts it off from the get-go when you have that kind of motive. But we see here that there's like a, what I think could be pretty aptly and properly described as like a heavenly power working through a person when virtue is demonstrated, is manifest, flowing in their life. And so it is a thing actually quite distinct from and not limited to themselves, even though it is working through them. And so what they're really doing is portraying a different kind, a higher kind of life. In fact, I think everybody's any of those who tend to be sensitive to this idea of all people being equal and having that kind of fairness as to the value of one person over another might be a little disgruntled by this comparison of the gentleman versus the petty person. But you have to look at it from the point of view of this life, those who have it and those who don't. And it is not something that even the gentleman himself, especially as one who has learned in his walk as a gentleman, selflessness and humility. It's not something that he imposes upon those he considers to be petty people or petty persons, or tries to find some strange sense of camaraderie with those who he considers to be gentlemen. Again, walking all of it out in such a calculated way is obviously not effortless action. It's not Wu-wei. And so your influence very quickly is no longer the wind of virtue that it's supposed to be, or that it can be, or should be, among those who are not at that place, but are still influenced by it, inevitably influenced by it. And so to remain in the place of virtue, of goodness, that's why it's described in many other places in the Analects as being just this nearly impossible thing to stay in. Like there's an Analect where Confucius says, "Man, most of my disciples, when it comes to goodness, they are only able to attain it in fits and starts," is what he says. So they have it for a little bit, or they near it for a time, and then they move back into whatever unique sort of difficulties or troubles they tend to have. And of course, then he points out his student Yan Hui, his best student, the one that died young. He doesn't have that problem. He doesn't have that issue of remaining in goodness in fits and starts and the way his other disciples do. But even that same student is and was considered stupid by other disciples. He was very poor. He lived on rice and water basically, and he was definitely not as achieved in the same sense that the other students were with their positions of power or the their intellectual abilities, whatever those things were for them. But Confucius said, at least he put what I taught into practice, and he did it sincerely. And so there was definitely this kind of detachment, which Yan Hui had towards his own life, his own circumstances, but this intense devotion he had to what he knew to be, what he knew to be wisdom. And for him, it wasn't even like this teacher's pet sort of situation, like we might imagine that he could have had with Confucius. It was just this very sincere, desire to pursue the way with the fullness of his heart. And Confucius was never shy. He was never shy to point that out, even as a kind of comparison amongst his students. I mean, I've mentioned before, but talking to another student, they were saying, man, nobody can figure things out as quickly as Yan Hui can. Even the most intelligent student of Confucius, I don't remember his name, like Zixia or something. He's like, man, I'm not as capable as Yan Hui. Like when I've learned 3 things, he's already learned 100. And Confucius himself says neither of us are as capable as him. But he was such a simple young man too. You can see the power of his his virtue, touching even the heart of his master. Now that's pretty substantial.
Yeah, we went through 1219 in December of last year. I think it was your dad that put it very simply. It was helpful because he is not teaching, he is a teacher. Which I think is very, and then he put teaching as an experiential observation of a way of life.
Yep.
You actually connected it to some Bible verses too.
Also, in regards to 1219, just reading through that, just one little excerpt that I think perfectly fits into what we were talking about in the context of 1219. But in this passage, we see a suspicion of recourse to legal means and reliance on punishment. Widespread disorder among the common people is a sign of immorality among the ruling class. And in such a situation, it is actually cruel and unfair to punish the people for their transgressions. I feel like that is very in line with what we were talking about, even with children, in the sense of punishment of the terrible twos time period. And yes, I'm remembering this now, and I in regards to what you were saying and like how it relates to like the modern liberal way of perceiving things, there's like a similarity there with that lack of punishment. But simultaneously, it is very against that modern ideology with that all are equal, because it's not quite that. In my opinion, it's like the best of all things, not necessarily a mean, but more of just the closest to the mark, and all things kind of can graze the mark in certain aspects, but none quite hit it like this does.
What about the rest of you? Any thoughts? Come on, we covered a lot.
Sometimes things just resonate internally, not always easy to express with words.
No one said it would be easy.
Yeah, there seems to be this effortlessness that is described as Wu-wei that follows not only learning but also managing and governing, which I find interesting. That there's a, I think it comes down to who you are yielded to as a person, and when you are in that right standing before God, that not only will that dictate the way that you learn throughout your life, but the way that you affect other people. And I think that's what this is getting at here, to where you're not going out of your way to teach people things or to learn things yourself. But those things naturally come. And that's what, even when I put in my writing, that learning has to be fought for in a lot of ways, which I still think it does, but it's not like you don't have to go out of your way to try and learn something. It will come, but it needs to be received by you in a particular way, and then it is going to take effort on your part to put it into practice. And that's where the striving is. The striving has to be under proper context, I think. It doesn't mean that there's no striving at all. But I think people, the way that we normally look at learning, we start the striving in the wrong way, because we're not yielded first.
Yeah, that is, even myself, I have to like continually check what I think it means to do things, even to live in effortless action and not doing it in a way. Because the first thing that the mind wants to think is, well, I'm doing less, maybe, like I just kind of let things go. That's not what Wu-wei means. It's not just like letting things, it's not simply, it is letting things take their natural course, but not by like sitting in a corner, letting them take their natural course. You're letting them take their natural course in you. And so you're still doing, but you're doing in a not doing kind of way. That is, in a way, the other words that I've always appreciated with in describing Wei, we mentioned effortless. It's also spontaneous, but even those things can limit, I think, your understanding as to how that actually looks in practice. Another word that I've mentioned in other conversations that I think actually ties into this in a very important way is the timeliness in which you're doing a thing, or by which you do a thing. And so, again, this ends up having to do much more with not as much what you're doing, but how you're doing it. And that's what we tend to get caught up so much. Like, I'm even thinking of our earlier discussion with the way parenting looks. We're focused a lot more on what is done, right? Like punishment or not punishment. You know, that kind of, is it this or that kind of thinking. There is a place and a season and a time for both. And that is what requires effortless action. That is knowing when one is needed and when one isn't. And then not only knowing the when, but also the how. Wu-wei, living a life of virtue, enlightened virtue, is the mean by which, the manner in which you know the timeliness of things and the proper method of things. Because it's not done in a way that has to do with even merely basing things on precedent. So it doesn't even rely on this is the way that it was for me, so this is the way that will be for them, you know. But it doesn't mean that it completely neglects or dismisses precedent. Wu-wei doesn't categorically dismiss things. It sees what is the right, it sees the mean in the midst of all things. And again, we'll have to clarify, as we do almost every time, the mean isn't a compromise. It's not simply finding this balance that you've determined for yourself between what seem to be two opposing ways of thinking. It's not that. It's something that it's above all of that, even though you're walking in the midst of all of it as, say, a parent or a ruler or a manager. These are all positions of authority, but this doesn't just have to do with, even though it's the context we're looking at, it doesn't always have to do with positions of authority.
I think a way that I've come to understand Wu-wei and thinking about it is to kind of overcome that idea of just not doing anything, of sitting in the corner, is that we are actively doing things in life, but it's where our strength in life comes from. It's not a place of our own strength. And it's almost like instructions from something higher. And that's, I think, what Confucius may have believed, is that higher way was from above, and we believe that obviously in context of the Lord in our lives. And I think of Wu-wei as something like something leading us, but it's not, we're not leading our own life with our own strength. It's something that we are following, almost being instructed in. But it is the way because it is God leading us in it. But again, a lot of the time it is not us that makes all the choices or uses all our own strength or all our own wisdom in life, because at that point that we're just trying to cut our own path in the woods. That's just what I was thinking about in the context of Wu-wei, but it's phone call.
And I what you're saying, I was thinking of a meta way to understand Wu-wei. Again, this is not like a comprehensive description, but we've been talking about in the other half of this class the importance of learning to learn, right? Wu-wei is not just is not simply the manner in which you respond to a thing. It can be thought of even as the manner in which you respond to your response. So like you see the way your heart reacts to a thing, or your mind begins to calculate a thing. And this is where the learning to learn aspect of Wu-wei comes in, is you think, how am I? It's not, you don't just question yourself, how am I thinking? It's not just an examination or analysis of the state of your heart. It's not just reflection. It's not just introspection. But it's the way to then move forward, having seen what you have seen in yourself. So it is response to your response. And then you're able to truly respond in Wu-wei when you have responded, having considered the response of your responsibility. There's obviously a much more eloquent way to put that, but
I really appreciate
Does that make
you saying
sense?
that, actually. That is, I feel like exactly what I observed with that writing.
that's the way to suspend judgment too. That's the way to walk in a careful way, regardless of what you come across. And it again, this does not validate like this super detached, fateful way of thinking where like anything goes kind of way. But no, it's actually a way to apply a much keener sense of discernment than you otherwise would have if it's just a matter of instant, this is what I think about a thing, sort of. I mean, you're always going to be put in situations where you have to give an instant response. And the consequence of that, good or bad, is inevitable. But that's the thing about discipline of self beforehand, is that instant response can change depending on the way your heart is to begin with. And that's why Wu-wei and the initial response of the heart is a lifelong process. It's a very latent thing. So that's why Confucius himself was unable to say until he was 70, I was able to follow my heart without stepping over the line. It takes a while.
Very encouraging you to say that, because I've actually observed that exact thing in my life, and that's really cool. I'm always very, I won't say disappointed, but my initial reaction is always not where I want it to be. And almost,
That goes for all of us, at least for me, I can say.
but I always, and I mean, that's exactly what I was describing with the reading your dad assigned us. My initial reaction was not what I thought or wanted it to be. And I spent a lot of this week analyzing why I thought about it that way.
Well, this
trying
is-
to hear others.
This is a perfect example to use that Chinese parable we always like that. I mean, who tells one of the farmers, like, man, you're so blessed. I don't know. And then, no, you're so unlucky. You're cursed. I'm not sure. He would always very wisely refrain from judging a situation so quickly. Elijah, do you want to pray for us?
Lord, we bless your holy name, Father. I thank you for this time and these people gathered here today. I pray that our hearts would be open to receive wisdom, Lord, and to give love to each other and to you, Father. Pray that we would have an attentive spirit to whatever you would bring before us, and to not hesitate or to share and to be a part and to grow together. I pray for your continued blessing on those people and these times we spend together here. Pray it's in your name.
Good.